Americans for Prosperity is committed to breaking barriers across the country, and Americans for Prosperity is growing across North Dakota. By calling on lawmakers to reduce taxes, spend less, improve health care, and provide second chances, we can empower all North Dakotans to rise. We're fighting for you. Join us today so we can make North Dakota the best state to live, work, and raise a family. Americans for Prosperity paid for this ad. Well, the only thing we ever seem to talk about lately is coronavirus. It's unavoidable. It's dominating the news, as well it should. It's a scary thing, and everybody's putting in a lot of effort to try to, obviously, our public leaders, our public officials, trying not to scare people and trying to bring facts to the situation and trying to deal with this in a way that allows life to go on as usual as much as possible. But right now, in a lot of ways, we're on lockdown. And one of the places that we're locked down, one of the places that's probably impacting us the most directly is that our schools are, for the most part, shut down. The kids aren't going to classes. That means they're staying home. That's, creating difficulties for parents who, weren't necessarily set up to care for those children during this time. And also there's the question of, because very soon Governor Burgum, and I believe April 1st is the deadline by which, he wants to be signing off on some of these things. He charged North Dakota school districts to come up with a sort of virtual or remote, whatever terms you want to use, education system where people are, students are going to be meeting over the internet, getting assignments over the internet, issues like that. So how is that going to work? We've been talking about distance education, mostly I think mostly in the realm of higher education for a long time now. But how well does this work? Are our kids going to be sufficiently served by this? Here to talk with me about this is Dr. Dan Conn. He is a associate professor of teacher education and a Master of Education program director at Minot State University. Dan, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
So you essentially, you're engaged in the practice of teaching, right? That's what you do.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
How long have we been in a K through 12 setting? Because again, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like higher education is a little further along in terms of distance education. I feel like it's already something at North Dakota State University system's been doing. We still have mostly on-campus students, but a lot of students have been doing distance education already. Those things already exist in higher education. In a lot of ways, they don't exist in K through 12 in North Dakota. Is that right of me to say?
Yeah, that's largely correct. There are some rural schools that have been utilizing more online just because they don't have the faculty to offer like Spanish classes and things like that. But by and large, the K through 12 setting doesn't really use online learning like we do in higher ed. And even in higher ed, like you said, it's still mostly face-to-face, but growing number in higher ed are online now.
So how effective is this going to be? I mean, because we're essentially asking the universities who do have some experience at it, they do have some systems set up, but we're essentially asking K through 12 in North Dakota to do something they haven't really done before, and we're asking them to do it on a very short timeline. What does this look like? I mean, what are you hearing? I know you've worked extensively in education in North Dakota and outside of North Dakota. What are you hearing from your teacher friends about meeting this challenge?
It sounds very daunting, and they're trying to have a good attitude and keep up their spirits and that kind of thing. But it's rough. And in a lot of cases, I don't think it's quite developmentally appropriate to have kids learn online all day. And in a lot of cases, kids don't have access to internet and things like that. So there's just so much to consider and juggle. I was speaking with a kindergarten teacher the other day, and for her, online learning is going to be really difficult, and for good reason. Kindergartners aren't really, developmentally ready to learn online all day, nor should they, and, stare at a screen and that kind of thing. So I think it's challenging, but especially for elementary and the lower you get in grades, I think the more challenging it will be.
This isn't really going to be, I mean, in a lot of ways, in North Dakota, we already have an active homeschooling community. They're not, I wouldn't say that they're nowhere approaching the majority, but there's a lot of them out there, and they're already doing this. But in that situation, you really have a parent supplanting the teacher. I mean, if you're choosing to homeschool, that means one parent or both parents or somebody has to say, I'm the instructor, I'm the teacher, I'm going to be guiding the kids through the curriculum, I'm going to, all of that stuff. It seems to me that in order to make what we're trying to do in this time of coronavirus is somebody at home still going to have to effectively be the teacher, right?
Absolutely. And that it's so hard because in some cases, I don't think parents are really qualified to teach certain things. For example, reading or literacy. There's a lot of nuance to it. It's not just like pick up a book and, read and sound out words. And in fact, sometimes just telling students to sound out words can perpetuate problems because they're not doing like the right decoding strategies and things like that. So sometimes by like helping, you could actually like maybe make matters worse or at least confuse sort of their development. I do think parents will play a critical role in this, but I wonder if it would make more sense to have parents teach students things they already know. Maybe work with them, within the house, talk about their hobbies, play games with their students, teach their young people how to cook, when possible. Really involve them in learning about life, and maybe reading to them, and that kind of thing, but not necessarily trying to like assume the role of a teacher just because it takes a lot of training to get there, and there's still a great deal of nuance. And so to me, parents would be best served just to teach them things that they know and try to build on their students' passions and interests and do that in relevant ways. I was even thinking I saw some masks being made and people making masks for all the nurses and people in the medical field. If parents had a sewing machine, maybe the student and parents could make masks, and send those to hospitals and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
You're a lot smarter than I am, Dan. But I've always thought that education, there's sort of two, and I don't know how to say, categories of learning. Like there's learning subject matter, which is I'm learning about cells in science, or I'm learning about, formulas in math or what have you. But then there's also learning how to learn, right? Mm-hmm. I think this, and I feel like right now I'm not qualified to teach my kids science, right? I was totally a reading and literature guy. So like a lot of time math and some of that stuff, I'm pretty good at the basics, but I'm not really qualified to teach my kids geometry. Cause I'm going to be right there next to them, kind of scratching my head, what is going on with it? But I feel like there's a lot I could do to teach my kids how to learn, like how to be curious, how to find answers. Like, oh, you're curious about this? Well, let's go find the answers. Let's learn about this subject matter. I feel like that is something that parents in the short term could really help with their kids. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I actually couldn't agree more. And, my friends and I have put together a resource for parents and teachers and students, kind of building on what you just talked about. And if they want to go it's on a website. It's called redandgreenschool.org. That's redandgreenschool.org. And anyway, it just has a list of activities kind of built to develop students' passions, their capacities in relevant ways. We even work on like mindfulness or presence, helping young people to pay attention for a long period of time and things like that. We think parents can help in these realms in tremendous ways. And just like what you said, helping your students to be curious, to want to know about their world, to want to learn, which is, an awesome thing in itself. And if parents could inspire learning, that this could be, even though it's a crisis and an epidemic, there could be some special learning going on in houses amongst families, I think.
But let's talk. I mean, that's all well and good, but our school districts are going to be coming at us parents, because I have a child. I have one kid in college down at Bismarck State. I have another kid in the Minot public school system. Our school districts are going to be coming at us with some sort of a plan. I'm not real sure what that's going to look like yet. I think our school districts are frankly still figuring it out, and through no fault of their own. I mean, what they're being asked to do is a huge challenge, but they're going to be coming at us with something. I imagine it's going to be some sort of online learning. We're going to be watching videos or something. How do we deal with that? Like, as parents, how do we maximize what our school districts are going to be asking us to do, and to turn that into a good experience?
That's such a great question and a difficult challenge. I was just reading some of the requirements from districts in terms of the plan that they have to put together. And it still sounds to me like really taxing on teachers. They're still expecting quite a bit in terms of being able to deliver a curriculum, being able to do it online. In my opinion, I think it's a big ask and maybe unreasonable given the circumstances to expect all students to learn online and to learn adequately and appropriately online. I'm curious what different districts are doing, but I think we would be best served as parents to ask questions, to push back when something seems unreasonable. I think that there's going to have to be a lot more grace than what's being presented in some of these decrees. We've got to understand that these kids have emotional needs and they have social needs. We need to take care of like the whole child. School is very important, but a lot of the conversations I've heard are really just around like intellectual capacities, and they're not about, thinking of sort of the whole child. So, sometimes schools can send pretty scary letters, and, you'll get a text or an email and it sounds very serious, and you want to pay attention to those, but at the same time, like, I think stick up for your kid, and if you need to ask questions or even push back a little bit if something seems developmentally inappropriate or just like not a good idea, I think as parents we have to be empowered to push against that a little bit.
I think and just speaking again as a parent, I think sometimes schools can go a little overload. I mean, I'm very involved in my kids' education. I check Power School every day. I'm very engaged with the teachers. I'm pretty hands-on. The school overwhelms me sometimes with the amount of paper that they send home. And even with and again, this is a very unique circumstance, but at one point I got 11 texts in one day from my school district, and I'm dealing with everything else. And I have teachers are like, sending messages on things like Remind, like, oh, we miss the kids and all this other stuff. And it's like, that's great. And I appreciate the sentiment, but we are very busy here at home, and we're juggling a lot. And sometimes I think there's just so much information. I think educators lose, like you guys do education for a living, but for us, it's a part of our lives, and it's a very important part of our lives. But we have career, we have grocery shopping, we have everything else that we have to do. I really think we need to keep this narrowly focused. Do you understand? I don't understand I'm not even sure what point I'm trying to make here, but I think we need to be very narrowly focused on, let's find some things that are going to work in the short term to get us through this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the worst thing schools could do right now is overcomplicate things and over-bureaucratize things. Sometimes schools get so caught on this idea that learning is very linear, and if we don't constantly push the kids, we're going to lose, all these important steps. But I think in a good way, that's not how kids learn. They're these human beings, and sometimes they learn a lot, and sometimes they don't learn very much. Just like sometimes they grow a lot, and sometimes they don't grow very much. They're people, and they react in different ways. So I think you're absolutely right. And as parents, just being able to love your kids and be there for them, support them in school when you can. But I think what you were talking about earlier is maybe even more important. Help them to be curious, to want to know about their world. Maybe involve them in their local community. Even though we're stuck in homes, maybe we could write letters to, nurses or some of the heroes in the front lines.
Yeah. I mean, one thing because obviously my job, I work in the news media. So my job a lot of times is I'm getting press releases from the governor's office and press releases from the Department of Health and all this data. I mean, I've had my daughter sitting looking over my shoulder as I'm writing, and I'm just telling her, well, this is how I take this data and synthesize it into a column. And this is how I write, and this is my process. I feel like that's valuable to her. She's seeing a little bit of what normally she doesn't care about what Daddy does, but now she's very bored, and so she cares a little bit more about this nerdy stuff that I'm doing on the computer all the time.
It's like you have a little apprentice.
Yeah, in some ways I do. So it's that's been very good. So what you were drilling down a little bit. You were talking about some of these things that are coming down from the state. I honestly, other than just sort of Governor Burgum's top level, this is sort of the timeline for when we need to implement this. You were saying that some of the requirements coming down on. Can you walk us through that? I mean, what are school districts being asked to do here?
Yeah, so this came from the DPI, the Department of Public Instruction. Sure. And it's distance learning expectations, and it just kind of like goes through expectations that school districts are supposed to have a plan for by March 27th. And to me, it still seems pretty daunting and overly bureaucratic. It sounds like they're trying to be flexible, but they still expect lots of results in measurable ways. And when I hear talk about measurable ways, I'm assuming there's going to be a standardized assessment right around the corner. They're talking about special education accommodations, which is really interesting because we do want to make those. But I think anytime you start assigning online assignments, that's going to be difficult for some special education students, So therefore, you're, I think, going to be in a conundrum where you're not going to be able to meet some of the IEP demands because of online learning. I don't think you can for all students with an IEP. So there's it looks like a lot of legal language and very scary. If I were a teacher or even a superintendent, I don't know how I would answer some of this. But I have a feeling that it's going to come with a lot of, IXL math, which is like kind of a computer program that kids can take. They're probably going to push sort of those commercialized reading programs. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think the last thing our kids should be doing right now is just spending a lot of time doing math computation on an app or, reading books that are assigned through a computer. I would way rather them read a real book, or use math in real world meaningful ways. As I read this, though, I don't get the impression that's the way we're going. I think it'll be very much using kind of apps and online programs to measure learning.
Yeah, in terms of the testing, I thought I saw, and I was just trying to find the press release while you were talking, and I can't now. I thought I read somewhere where the superintendent had canceled statewide testing for the rest of the year, but I could be wrong.
Yes. No, that's correct.
Okay.
The way that this is worded in terms of them wanting growth and expecting plans, I get a feeling like when they all come back in the fall and they do MAPS testing, there's still going to be an expectation that kids maintain. And I think a lot of times when that kind of language gets introduced, people go to sort of commercial answers instead of just their own best instincts as teachers or parents for what, children as human beings need right now.
There is a place for some of that, right? I mean, we do sight words apps, for reading. I mean, we do some of the math things I wouldn't say it's a primary thing, but those things can help. I mean, they're not useless, are they?
I think they could be used in like a supplemental way, but just in some of the conversation that I've heard, it sounds like math at the elementary level is essentially going to become IXL math, which I don't know if you've dealt with IXL math, yeah. But that would be a dry version of math.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And listen, nothing's going to face in classroom face-to-face instruction. I personally, the reason why my kids, I think Minot Public Schools is a pretty good system. I mean, I send my kids there because I think we have good teachers, and I think they benefit from the classroom setting. You really can't replace face-to-face instruction in a classroom setting. You just can't. We can't replicate that at home.
I totally agree. And if we are going to use online learning, I would like to see them use it more for like video conferencing where students can interact with teachers. I teach a lot of online classes at Minot State, and I love the video conferencing because I can have small groups. And I think as a teacher, I can usually do best when I have small groups. And I know many teachers feel the same way. So it would be great to me if we are going to use the online environment to use it to dialogue with students, to let students dialogue with one another. To me, that social aspect is really important and would be the best use of our technologies at this time.
But obviously you run into difficulties. Some kids may not have a reliable internet connection at home. They may not have the proper devices at home. I mean, it's a tough thing when you're talking about the public. I mean, that's everybody, right? And most North Dakotans, I think, are affluent, and these devices are cheap enough, but there may not be the technical know-how at home. I mean, that's a tough thing. But you're right. I think that is interesting. I wonder if there's an opportunity, just you and I kicking this around, for the university, like the K-12 system, to make use of the university system's resources in that regard.
I think that would be a great idea. We have what's known as Blackboard Collaborate, and that works really well. We also use Microsoft Teams for video conferencing, and then many of us like Zoom as well. Yeah. Google Hangout works well.
We are talking over Google Hangouts right now, as a matter of fact.
That's awesome. Yeah, and to me, that's where there's more potential. And you're right that not everybody has access, at least though a lot of smartphones you can utilize those apps on. And again, not everybody has those, but I would way rather than be using technology to talk and dialogue than do math problems all day.
Do you think that we should have set up some sort of and the reason why I bring this up, during the 2019 session, there was a state lawmaker, Republican from Jamestown, Jim Greenwich, who came up with an idea where, and he was trying to address the issue with snow days, right? Because we live in North Dakota, weather cancellations are a part of life. And so he wanted the state to essentially develop, or have school districts develop, if we're going to have an extended period of time where school's canceled, we would have sort of in place some systems that we could go to and lean on. You know, he brought this up when the coronavirus, he texted me and said, hey, you know, what about this old idea? It got voted down in the State House in 2019. But going forward, and obviously that doesn't help us much now, but going forward, do you think schools would benefit from having, you know, sort of something in place saying, because I feel like it has a lot of uses. I mean, obviously this is sort of hopefully a once in a lifetime thing that's going on now, but weather cancellations are much more common. Sometimes students have extended absences because of illnesses, or even maybe it was something that could be used while kids are on vacation. I don't know, but should we look at that for sort of long-term planning, having a system in place that we could deploy if kids are going to be out of school for a long period of time?
I think so. The caveat that I would say is I don't want students to miss out on some snow days. I think it's good to stay home every now and then and make a snowman.
Man, what kind of a teacher are you? Man, why didn't I have you when I was in school?
Well, I think that's good for people to do those things. But I agree with that notion. And I think, you know, now that we realize that there's sort of a hole in our system, it's up to us to respond and to fill in that gap or devise some sort of structure that schools could go to in these times. I think, you know, now's the time to kind of develop those type of things. And I would welcome anybody that wants to dialogue along those lines as well.
Well, that's good. Any other resources out there for parents who are trying to figure out, listen, how do I keep the ball rolling? Well, first, let me ask that question. How worried do we need to be? Because we hear a lot. I know in the public policy arena, when we debate, every once in a while, you know, we'll debate like year-round school, right? Let's do away with some of the like the big summer break. Let's go to year-round school, and we talk a lot about kids losing progress over the summer break, and how that's, you know, one of the obstacles. Is that a real concern? I mean, how concerned should we be about kids going backwards in terms of education while this is going on?
You know, I think a lot of that's BS in terms of kids like going backwards and things like that. I don't think learning works that way. I mean, I guess if you don't practice something, you could lose that skill. But I also think we're gaining new skills, you know, and having new experiences. Sometimes I think really over the last 40 years, as we talk about children through the lens of assessments and achievement, we kind of lose track of the humanity behind those kids. So yeah, that kind of language just bothers me in general. And I think things like year-round school aren't that helpful. They're children now. They have their whole life to work. I don't think they're going to benefit from like a meritocracy standpoint of work ethic and that kind of thing. I think we should let kids play, be with their family, develop hobbies, live a well-rounded life. And it's unfortunate when school sort of oversteps its role in that sense and really forces kids to, you know, spend long hours in homework or, you know, worrying and stressing over grades and test scores and things like that.
What I'm hearing you say, and maybe what I'm taking away from this is just engage with your kids. I mean, they're at home. Engage with them. Is that really the best thing we could be doing?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yeah. And I think parents have a lot to teach and offer their kids at this time. I think, you know, if kids are able to call their grandparents, this would be a great time for that. You know, if they're able to video conference with family and friends, this is a good time for that. Playing games, sharing stories, all kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's a time for, maybe as a parent, you know, it's a terrible situation, but savor your time with your kids and look at yourself not as a classroom teacher, but as a teacher of life. And maybe your students will learn lessons in these coming weeks, you know, that'll last more significantly for them than perhaps some IXL math.
I always thought that two of the things my parents did best for me, and I'm somebody, I struggled in classroom settings. I struggled. I'm a college dropout. I just couldn't. I struggled with it. I really did. I struggled with classrooms my whole life. But my parents one thing I think they did for me is, A, they let me read whatever I wanted. So I was reading some books at a young age, which maybe other parents would cringe at a little bit, but they did not censor my reading at all. And
Cool.
I always got to sit at the grown-ups table when they were talking politics or whatever. I got to sit at the table, and they were patient with me, and they included me in those conversations. So I mean, all the other kids were outside throwing mud balls at each other or whatever, and I'm sitting at the table talking about taxes with the grown-ups, right? I mean, that was sort of how I grew up. And not every kid's going to want to do that, but I feel like that was very powerful to me, like to be engaged in that way and to have them patiently explain, well, no, your seventh grade interpretation of the IRS is probably not the accurate one. But I really benefited from that, and I feel like my kids benefit when I don't censor them. Like when I'm talking about things, I mean, if I'm interviewing the governor, one of my kids is a lot of times sitting on the couch listening. I feel like that's a good thing.
That's awesome. I think you should keep doing that. And, there's schooling and then there's education, and education is so much bigger than just schooling. And I think that you're providing an education that's really unique to your child. It's like the dentist has children with clean teeth, and you're going to have children that understand the way that civics work and can dialogue on big topics.
Well, Dan, I appreciate it. Any last words again as we're as parents or parents, educators, is this daunting task of how we make sure the kids' needs are being met as we go through this? Any last words of advice?
Yeah, I'd just turn your listeners again to the website redandgreenschool.org. We put a bunch of references on there thinking that we would be talking them today, and just wanted to provide that to your listeners. I think these kind of conversations are really important, and I would encourage parents and teachers alike to keep the big picture in mind. These are human beings. They have feelings, and they probably miss their friends, and they're scared. And I think, meeting those needs and doing some of the things that you talked about, Rob, might have more meaning and importance in their life right now than trying not to lose what we gained in math and things like that. So thanks for having me. This is a really important conversation, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you for making time, Dan.